I never expected a simple family gathering to turn into one of the most humiliating and unforgettable nights of my life. But that's exactly what happened, and even now, I still can't decide if what I did next was justified or completely over the line. Imagine this: my daughter-in-law, the woman I had once trusted and welcomed into my home like a daughter, screaming at the top of her lungs in front of all my friends and family. And before I could even process what was happening, she grabbed the nearest vase from the table and smashed it across the floor, shattering not just the expensive crystal, but the calm, polite atmosphere I had worked so hard to maintain. Tell me honestly, would you have stayed quiet in that moment, or would you have finally stood up for yourself, no matter the consequences? That's exactly the question I was faced with that night, and looking back, it was the beginning of a long, tense war that would unravel my entire family. It all started months before the infamous party. My son Alex had married Lily, a woman who seemed perfect on the surface. Smart, beautiful, and charming. She was the kind of daughter-in-law any parent would brag about. But over time, little cracks began to show: subtle manipulations, passive-aggressive comments, and an insatiable desire to control every aspect of our family life. I tried to brush it off at first, thinking maybe I was being too critical or sensitive, but my husband Mark saw it too. He warned me, "Give her time. Maybe it's just a honeymoon phase." But I had a feeling it was more than that. Lily was ambitious, not in a career sense, but in controlling our family dynamic, and I should have known then that those little cracks would turn into gaping chasms. The party in question was supposed to be a celebration, a simple dinner gathering for my birthday. I had invited a few close friends, some extended family, and of course my son and Lily. I spent the entire week preparing, cleaning the house from top to bottom, planning the menu, and even baking a special cake. Everything was perfect, or at least, it should have been. But from the moment Lily walked through the door, I could sense tension in the air. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't chatting politely, and the way she glanced around the room made me uneasy. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but I felt it immediately. Dinner started off normally enough. We exchanged pleasantries, laughed at old memories, and I tried to keep the atmosphere light. But as soon as it came time for the toasts, Lily's demeanor changed. She stood up, interrupting me mid-sentence, and said, "Before we start, I think it's important everyone knows that my mother was supposed to be invited to this dinner, and I'm shocked that she wasn't." The room fell silent. My friends exchanged awkward glances, and Mark looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. I froze, unsure whether to apologize or defend myself. "Lily, I began, but she cut me off. "No, you don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "My mother has done so much for us, and you didn't even consider her feelings. How dare you exclude her?" The anger in her voice was palpable, like a storm brewing in a teacup. I tried to stay calm, I really did. "Lily, it's not about her. This was meant to be a small, intimate gathering. We just didn't have enough room." But again, she interrupted, louder this time, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "Intimate gathering? You think your comfort is more important than my mother's dignity? How dare you?" And that's when it happened. The scream that still echoes in my ears. "Sabar! Masar!" The words hit me like a punch, loud enough that my neighbors might have heard. The room was frozen, the air thick with tension, and my heart was racing. Before I could respond, Lily's hand shot out and grabbed the nearest vase. The glass hit the floor with a deafening crash, shattering into pieces. I felt a rush of heat and anger, but also embarrassment. All eyes were on us, and in that instant, I knew nothing would ever be the same. At that moment, 1,000 thoughts ran through my head. I thought about my son Alex, sitting there in stunned silence, unsure whether to defend his wife or his mother. I thought about the years I had spent preparing for moments like this, teaching my children about respect, patience, and family values. And most importantly, I thought about myself. Would I stand down and let this chaos unfold? Or would I finally confront the person who had been undermining me for months, perhaps even years? To understand why that scream hit so hard, you need to know about the tension that had been building long before the party. Lily's mother, Mrs. Simmons, had always been an influential figure in her life. From the moment Lily entered our family, Mrs. Simmons began inserting herself into everything. She critiqued our house, suggested changes to our furniture, and even commented on our children's clothing choices. At first, we tried to accommodate her, thinking it was part of being polite and welcoming. But over time, it became clear that Lily had been grooming us, or perhaps testing us through her mother. Every small favor turned into a demand, every polite suggestion into a critique. And I, being the person who values fairness and boundaries, started to push back. Which brings us back to that night. When Lily screamed, it wasn't just about her mother being excluded. It was about control, power, and the deep resentment she had been nurturing for months. The vase crashing to the floor was the physical manifestation of her frustration, but it was also a warning. She was telling me, in the loudest way possible, that she would not be ignored or dismissed. And I had a choice to make: either let her take over my home completely, or stand my ground, no matter how uncomfortable or confrontational it became. As I stood there frozen, the room silent, I could feel the judgment in everyone's eyes. Some of our guests were looking at me with sympathy, others with shock, and a few, I suspect, with amusement. It's amazing how quickly family gatherings can turn into public spectacles when someone decides to lose control. My mind was racing. I thought about how many times I had smiled politely while Lily undermined me, how often I had swallowed my frustration, and how long I had tolerated subtle manipulations. And in that instant, a fire ignited inside me, a mix of anger, betrayal, and the sheer need to reclaim my dignity. But before I could react, Mark finally spoke. "Lily, that's enough," he said, his voice firm but calm. "This is not how we handle things." Lily's eyes flashed with fury, but instead of backing down, she turned her wrath toward him. "Don't you dare defend her! You know she's wrong, and you're letting her treat me this way." The tension escalated. Chairs were shuffled, my friends exchanged worried whispers, and I realized that this confrontation was spiraling far beyond my control. It was then that I decided to step in. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart, and said, "Lily, your mother is welcome to visit, but tonight is my birthday dinner." This gathering was planned with love and thought for everyone present. I did not exclude anyone out of malice. I simply had to consider the space and the dynamics of the event. My voice was trembling, but I kept it steady, refusing to let her intimidation tactics win. She laughed, a cold, bitter laugh that made my skin crawl. "You think a birthday dinner can justify this? You think your rules matter more than my family? I've been patient, but this is the last straw. How dare you? How dare you?" And then, before I could even respond, she made the decision to escalate further. She grabbed the cake from the table, the very cake I had baked myself, and threw it onto the floor, frosting and sponge flying in every direction. I wanted to scream, to demand she leave, but I also realized something important. Everyone in that room had just witnessed a breaking point. And that was when I knew, deep down, that this night would mark a turning point in my family, a night we would talk about for years. And here's where I pause and address you, the viewer, because I need your opinion. So that was the situation I was in. A daughter, in-law screaming, smashing things, my son frozen, guests shocked, and me standing there, trying to maintain composure while my entire family dynamic seemed to unravel. I had to make a choice, and it wasn't easy. Before I tell you what I did next, I want you to pause and think. If you were in my shoes, would you have let her continue, or would you have finally stood up, no matter the cost? What would you have done? Because the truth is, by that moment, the story wasn't just about a birthday dinner anymore. It was about control, respect, and boundaries. It was about years of simmering tension, subtle undermining, and the realization that some people are willing to bulldoze over family for their own sense of entitlement. I wanted to believe Lily was just having a bad day, that she would calm down, apologize, and we could move on. But deep down I knew this was bigger than a single outburst. It was a pattern, a personality, and a test I had no choice but to respond to. As the shattered vase and ruined cake lay at my feet, I made a decision. I would no longer be the passive parent, the quiet observer, the one who swallowed my words to keep the peace. I would confront this behavior, not with anger alone, but with clarity, firmness, and the kind of authority that comes from knowing you are in the right. I took a step toward Lily, and the room held its breath, everyone waiting to see if this confrontation would escalate further. I could see the fury in her eyes, the sense of entitlement, and I realized that whatever happened next would define our relationship forever. I started to speak, my voice calm but unwavering, outlining the boundaries she had crossed, the respect she owed not just to me, but to our entire family. I reminded her of the values we had instilled in Alex, the promises we had made to one another about how we treat family, and the simple fact that aggression and intimidation are never acceptable. Every word was deliberate, every sentence aimed at reclaiming control of the situation without letting it descend into chaos. I saw her mouth open, ready to interrupt, but this time I didn't falter. I continued, steady, firm, and unyielding. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Lily's breathing was heavy, her fists clenched, and I could see the battle waging behind her eyes. But something had shifted. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had spoken my truth, asserted my boundaries, and refused to let her disrespect me or my home. And while the tension was far from over, for the first time in months, I felt a sense of empowerment. I realized that this was just the beginning of a longer struggle, a conflict that would take patience, strategy, and emotional resilience to navigate. And so, as I stepped back, letting the silence speak for itself, I knew that the aftermath of that night would unfold in ways none of us could predict. But at least for the first time I had chosen my side. I had chosen to stand up for myself, and that choice, as terrifying as it was, would define the rest of our story. So there I was, standing in the middle of my dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of the vase, the cake, and a family that looked like it was on the verge of collapse. Lily's chest was rising and falling rapidly, her eyes blazing with fury, but there was a pause in her screaming, almost as if she realized, for the first time, that I wasn't going to back down. I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on me, Mark, my son Alex, our friends, even a few relatives who had come expecting a quiet, pleasant birthday dinner. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next, and in that moment, I realized that the next words I spoke could either calm the storm or ignite it into something completely uncontrollable. I took a deep breath, trying to channel every ounce of patience I had left. "Lily," I said, my voice calm but firm, "you cannot continue to treat people like this. Your anger and your sense of entitlement are not excuses for destroying other people's property or humiliating me in front of our family and friends. This isn't about your mother. This is about respect, and right now you've crossed a line." I could see the muscles in her jaw tighten, and for a second, I thought she might attack me physically, but instead, she stared at me, her eyes wide and burning with disbelief. "You think you can talk to me like that?" She spat, her words sharp and venomous. "You have no idea what my mother has done for us? You're just jealous because she's important to us, and you'll never understand?" The sheer intensity of her words sent a chill down my spine, but I held my ground. I knew this confrontation wasn't about convincing her emotionally. It was about setting boundaries, making it clear that her behavior was unacceptable and would have consequences. Mark finally stepped in, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder. "Lily," he said, his tone even but serious, "this isn't how we solve conflicts. We can talk about your concerns, but destroying things and yelling is not acceptable. Please sit down, take a breath." Lily glared at him like he had betrayed her, then turned toward Alex. My son's face was pale, torn between his loyalty to his wife and his love for me. I could see the fear in his eyes, fear of confrontation, fear of making the wrong choice, and fear of the family being torn apart. It was heartbreaking, but I also knew that if I didn't act now, nothing would change. I decided to lay it all out, every single frustration, every boundary that had been ignored, and every line that had been crossed over the past months. I told her about the subtle manipulations, the constant undermining, and the way she had tried to control the dynamics of our household. I reminded her that family is about mutual respect, compromise, and love, not domination and aggression. And as I spoke, I could see something shift in the room. Some people were nodding in agreement, others looked shocked at the intensity of the confrontation, but the silence was heavy, waiting for her reaction. She laughed then, but it was different from before, a harsh, almost desperate laugh. "You think I care about your rules? You think you can dictate how I feel about my own family? You have no idea what it's like to be me. You'll never understand!" The emotion in her voice was raw, painful, and frightening. I realized then that no amount of reasoning would change her perspective tonight. She wasn't just angry. She was determined to assert dominance, to make sure her mother's importance overshadowed everyone else's boundaries. But I couldn't let fear control me anymore. I had to act, and I had to act decisively. "Lily," I said, stepping closer, my voice lowering so it was sharp but controlled, "I don't need you to understand me. I just need you to respect me in this home. If you cannot do that, then I cannot allow this behavior to continue under my roof. You need to leave now, tonight, before this escalates any further." I could see her eyes widen in shock, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, trying to formulate a response. The room was frozen, and even Alex looked like he was about to faint. This was the moment when everything could go either way. And then, she did something I didn't expect. She lunged for the door. But it wasn't in retreat. It was a dramatic, exaggerated exit, her heels clicking furiously against the floor as she flung the door open and stormed out, leaving a trail of chaos behind her. I stood there for a moment, trembling, realizing that while the immediate confrontation was over, the war was far from finished. The house was a mess, the party ruined, and the emotional damage done. Mark came to my side, his hand gripping mine. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "It's over for now, and you set a line she can't cross again." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew the aftermath was going to be complicated. The next few days were tense beyond imagination. Alex didn't know who to side with. He was furious at his wife, but he also didn't want to see her alienated from the family. He called me repeatedly, trying to mediate, while I tried to remain calm, insisting that boundaries had to be enforced. Then came the texts from Lily, angry, manipulative, demanding apologies, claiming I had embarrassed her and ruined her reputation among our friends. It was relentless. Every notification on my phone made my stomach churn with anxiety, but I refused to respond in the heat of the moment. I knew that reacting impulsively would only fuel her fire. I also had to deal with the practical consequences. The vase was shattered, the cake ruined, and my carefully arranged table was a mess. It might seem trivial compared to the emotional drama, but to me, it was symbolic of the chaos she had brought into my home. Cleaning up became a metaphor for reclaiming my space, restoring order, and reasserting control over my life. I realized then that setting boundaries wasn't just about words. It was about actions, consequences, and standing firm even when the other person tried to manipulate or intimidate you. Weeks passed, and the family gatherings became a minefield. Lily would test me, Alex would attempt to mediate, and I would respond with calm but unwavering firmness. At first, it was exhausting. I spent sleepless nights worrying about whether my approach was too harsh or too lenient. But slowly I noticed a change. Lily's outbursts became less frequent, her manipulations less overt, and even Alex began to respect the boundaries I had set. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I realized then that the confrontation at my birthday dinner had been the catalyst, the spark that forced everyone to confront the reality of our family dynamics. And then, the most surprising thing happened. One evening, a month after the infamous party, Lily came to me quietly, almost humbly. She apologized, not just for the scream, the smashed vase, or the ruined cake, but for the pattern of disrespect and manipulation that had been building for months. Her words were awkward, but genuine. "I acted out of anger and frustration," she said, "and I didn't realize how much I was hurting everyone. I want to make things right." I could see the sincerity in her eyes, and in that moment, I understood that the confrontation, as painful and chaotic as it had been, had achieved what it needed to. It forced accountability, reflection, and ultimately, growth. Alex was relieved, of course, and Mark looked at me with a mixture of pride and astonishment. We began rebuilding our family relationships slowly, cautiously, with a newfound sense of respect and understanding. Lily learned that boundaries were not a threat, but a necessity. I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't make you unkind or unreasonable. It makes you human. And the rest of the family? They learned that respect, honesty, and courage matter more than appearances, social niceties, or avoiding uncomfortable conversations. Looking back, I realized that night was a turning point. The scream, the vase, the cake, it wasn't just chaos, it was a wake-up call. It forced us all to confront our emotions, our expectations, and our willingness to tolerate behavior that was destructive. I don't think anyone walked away unchanged, least of all Lily. She's not perfect, and we still have disagreements, but the respect that was established that night continues to guide our interactions. I learned that confrontation, when handled with clarity and strength, can be transformative rather than destructive. So here's the takeaway from my story. The moral, if you will, never underestimate the power of standing up for yourself, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it risks conflict. Boundaries are not a luxury. They're essential for maintaining dignity, respect, and harmony in any relationship. And sometimes, the chaos that ensues is exactly what is needed to shake people awake, to make them realize that actions have consequences and respect is non-negotiable. If you were on my side, if you've ever had to defend yourself against manipulation or disrespect, then I want you to do something right now like this video, because it means you understand the struggle. Subscribe for more stories like this, where real people confront shocking situations and stand up for what's right. And most importantly, share your thoughts on this entire ordeal in the comments section. How would you have handled Lily, the scream, and the shattered vase? Would you have stood your ground or let it slide? I want to hear your side of the story, because family drama is universal and every perspective matters. This story is over for now, but the lessons remain. Confrontation is uncomfortable. Chaos is inevitable, but standing firm, speaking your truth, and demanding respect is never wrong. I'll see you all in the next story, and until then, remember dignity, courage, and honesty are worth every moment of discomfort they bring.